Chapter 1/3 The Garden of Life 2. Instead of answering, Yong-ho mimicked Gusion's expression. Alarmed, Gusion gnawed his teeth and rummaged through his pocket. "Ma'am, here you are." It was his letter to Skathak. Upon receiving the sealed letter, Yong-ho smiled warmly. He was not sure whether it was because of the power of greed or his illusion, but he felt Gusion's sincerity in the letter. "Gusion. Why, I just called you. I think you're a better guy than I think." Gusion's expression turned bizarre. Yong-ho laughed like Skull and stood up with Catalina. It seemed like the two relied on each other. "Let's go, Catalina." "Yes, master." She quickly responded and nodded with a joyful expression. Her tail fluttered pleasantly. Yong-ho and Catalina moved out of Gusion's sight. Watching them silently, Gusion muttered with mixed feelings. "I wonder if I am right in describing them as master and Alune. Well, Alune was more ferocious anyway." He spoke with longing and joy, as well as wistfulness mixed in his voice. Amon didn't respond, and Gusion did not want his response. Taking out a cigar and putting it in his mouth, Gusion kept saying wistfully, "I really miss our lord." Even now, when he closed his eyes, he remembered clearly the last time he looked at the king's back. "Let me go back now, Gusion." Damon's voice was also trembling. Smiling at him once, Gusion slightly stuck out a cigar in his mouth, and Amon scattered the flames of the red lotus in the air with a smile. One of the small embers lit his cigar. Amon disappeared. Yong-ho and Catalina were no longer visible, but Gusion did not turn. Standing still, he was puffing out the smoke. Then he recalled the distant past. "It's really bad for my heart. Do you know how anxiously I am waiting for you every time you go to the arena? You get disconnected to me suddenly, then it takes a few hours to connect to you again. If you think I like you because you have come back much stronger, you're mistaken. Awesome. The dungeon's mana has been greatly enhanced along with the control." 17. What am I saying now? 17. Anyway, it's not good for my heart. As soon as Yong-ho got out of the arena, something like Lucius nagging or affectionate complaints kept pouring down like rain, making the sorry expression at her voice full of worry. Yong-ho laughed silly at her continuing chattering. Come to think of it, isn't Lucia's whole body her heart? Then, what's bad for the heart means that it's also bad for her whole body, right? Yong-ho stopped being a bit delusional about her and raised his head again. Catalina looked at him with a worried expression. Since she couldn't hear Lucia's voice, it was natural that she thought his action was strange, because he suddenly giggled as soon as he turned around the arena. He stroked her hair again, then said emphatically to clear her suspicion, "Did you say I became so strong? Of course. Maybe you can take full control of the first basement floor." Sure you can." "Definitely." What happened at the arena? Lucia was usually psyched, but even so today, she seemed so because she underwent a sudden growth. Although he couldn't see it, he could feel it. Obviously, the heart of the dungeon grew one step further. The images of Lucia in his head also changed from a young girl to a girl in the mid to late teens who looked like an adult now. Instead of explaining, he pointed his finger at the center of his forehead. As he withdrew mana to hide the horns, what he touched at the tip of his fingers was his smooth forehead, but Lucia could discern it. Fifth horn. Paul. "Oh my god, my master has a fifth horn." There was a marked gap between the second and third horns, and the gap widened as the number of horns increased. So it was natural that Lucia grew up, and that Catalina had a fourth horn. Yong-ho's growth this time was so dramatic. "Anything unusual while I was in the arena?" he asked. "No, but something unusual happened yesterday." "Trink, vis, azem. Azem Jing spirit Elagos mana has become stronger. I can't confirm the current status of the dungeon spirits, Skull and Ophelia, because they are in the dungeon of the House of Randalt. But it is clear that they have also changed." "Oh my god." Lucia could not immediately answer his call. Only shortly afterward did she respond emotionally. "A fourth horn has sprung out of Ophelia, the dungeon spirit. Finally, Ophelia has a fourth horn." Wow, numerous happy events in a row. Yong-ho smiled happily, then told Catalina briefly about it, since she was curious about what was going on. Even Catalina was so happy about Ophelia's fourth horn, but her expression was rather strange. Moreover, the way she touched the upper part of her ears was also unnatural. Only then did he find out what was on her mind. So, while brushing her hair, he told Lucia, Catalina also has 4 horns. Wow, really? T.S. I am thrilled, because everyone has suddenly become strong. Yong-ho's expression represented Lucia's reaction. Catalina, who wanted to show off her 4 horns, slightly bit her lower lip to hide her satisfied smile. He stroked Catalina's hair again and let out a long sigh. Since he was psyched in one way or another, he forgot he was still in bad shape. Lucia asked again in a worried tone, Master, are you okay? You look very tired. He didn't deny it flatly. Leaning against Catalina slightly, he said to Lucia, Tell Eligos to come here. No, to Scathak's room on the first basement floor. Catalina and I will also move there. Okay, don't overwork yourself. Please wait where you are now. I'll call clay golems in the training ground to come here. Sometimes it would be nice to use something to ride on, right? She insisted rather than inviting him to do so. Yong-ho nodded gently again this time. Sure, please. Yong-ho sat with Catalina on the sofa in Kaiwan's lounge. How long did they wait? Soon, clay golems appeared, making a thumping noise. What a mess you are! Scathach, standing clockwise, spoke to Yong-ho with a bitter smile. Yong-ho, who was held in clay golems elegantly, smiled bitterly. Lucia was currently trying to take over the entire first floor of the Labyrinth of Greed. So, Yong-ho directly ordered the golems to put him and Catalina down. Eligos wasn't seen yet because he was still coming down. Watching the clay golems waddling out of the Garden of Life, Scathach cast her gaze at Yong-ho and Catalina again. Well, I don't need your explanation. Okay, you need recovery first. Take a deep breath and relax. Yong-ho and Catalina gently followed her instruction. Right after he breathed out, Yong-ho suddenly felt naked. Scathach. He didn't even finish talking when Scathach beckoned lightly. All his clothes, including his underwear, were removed. In a strange sense of liberation, Yong-ho knew what he had to do. But it was too late. The moment he rolled his eyes to the side, this time, a fresh blue liquid wrapped around his body. It was the same for Catalina, who was sitting next to Yong-ho. Scathach touched the air again. Then, Yong-ho and Catalina's clothes were folded and placed neatly on the floor. How about it? You feel so comfortable that you don't even want to resist, right? With his whole body buried in a blue liquid mass and only his head sticking out, he nodded instinctively. He wanted to deny it, but he felt really comfortable. Catalina moaned pleasantly with her eyes closed. Yong-ho felt so comfortable, as if he was bathing in hot spring water. He felt like all the fatigue in his body was washed away, and that wasn't the only effect. The blue liquid, which could be called the vitality of Scathach, the immortal witch, breathed new power into them. It also affected their souls too. It's extremely significant that the demons have 1 more horn. What I mean is, you should not be content with the fact that your mana has become strong. Scathach approached him. Part of the blue liquid from the floor entwined her legs. Alun even described 1 more horn as rebirth. I agree with it to some extent because it's not your appearance that changes, your essence can be changed, and this change becomes greater as the number of horns increases. Yong-ho could feel something about Scathach. His feeling was similar to what he felt about his dungeon spirits, Catalina and Eligos. It seems that both of you overworked yourselves. You seem to have consumed a lot of mana right away, as soon as you got another horn. But you will be in big trouble. So, you had better refrain from repeating it next time. Yong-ho could not help but laugh awkwardly at her words. Obviously, he must have been crazy enough to use up the power of evolution during the battle. Oh my gosh, I think I was nagging too long. Don't speak ill of me later. She was kind and gentle, which was different from Lucius. It was unthinkable to speak ill of Scathach, who smiled as lovingly as a mother. Yong-ho pointed to the floor with a glance. Rummage through the inner pocket of my jacket. You'll find a letter from Gusion. Scathach's expression immediately brightened. Thank you as always. You're welcome. Smiling shyly, she took Gusion's letter. Normally, she would have opened the seal of the letter and started reciting it to Yong-ho, but she didn't today. Looking at the letter lovingly for a moment, she quickly poised herself and faced Yong-ho again. I want to read it right now, but I have a lot to do today. In particular, I have something to tell you, little master. Her voice was still sweet. but her eyes were a little different from before. Yong-ho recalled what Aemon had said before he left the arena. Skathak has something to tell you. Why was it now? Was it because he had 5 horns? You know that Brigada and the 7 godly energies were the fragments of the Demon King's flesh, right? She started by asking him. Yong-ho nodded because he experienced various things since he got Brigada, the absolute power that didn't exist anymore. Some said that the Demon King was the true creator of the demon world, and others said he was just a symbolic mass of power. No one could affirm which was more true. However, no one could deny the fact that the Demon King existed. The 7 deadly sins, the fragments of the spirit of the Demon King, the 7 godly energies, the fragments of his flesh, Brigada, the remnant of the Demon King, and God's metal, who didn't have godly energy. Skathak now started to mention godly energy, which was not the 7 deadly sins, and Brigada. Chapter 122, The Garden of Life 3. Here is the corrected and properly formatted paragraph. Godly energy can be said to be a huge chunk of Brigada. Brigada is an alloy with a lot of impurities, while godly energy is pure gold. Therefore, its synergy with the power of sin is not comparable to Brigada. Moreover, each godly energy has special abilities. The godly energy that fell into the hands of the king with the power of sin is truly the strongest weapon. All the 6 kings who currently rule the demon world had 1 godly energy. Even though he possessed one of the 7 deadly sins, only Yong-ho had no godly energy. You can deal with godly energy alone. However, there is no godly energy in the House of Mammon now. In the past, Mammon, the king of greed, possessed 4 out of the 7 godly energies. But after his death, there wasn't a single godly energy left in the Mammon family. All of them were taken away by other kings. Yong-ho felt a little incongruity in Skathak's words. She spoke as if the day would come when Yong-ho had to confront other kings. Maybe she wanted him to prepare for the future. The distance between Skathak and Yong-ho narrowed. They were close enough to feel each other's breathing. My master, the king of greed, has prepared something, so any future king of greed can confront those kings with godly energy. Proudly, Skathak reached out. Then, Yong-ho's hands, buried in the blue liquid, were naturally lifted. She gently wrapped them and said, "You are a qualified person. I'm going to make your power complete by getting the approval of all 12 dungeon spirits." Even while all of his clothes were being removed, the magnetic field on his left arm was activated. Silver metal covered his left arm. Skathak kissed the magnetic field, then breathed new magic into the back of Yong-ho's hand. The light enveloped the magnetic field. At that moment, its shape changed, like a dungeon spirit exposed to the power of evolution. A small circle was drawn on the back of his hand with the magnetic field. There were 12 grooves in the circle like a clock, and a clear blue gem was placed in one of the grooves, the groove between 10 and 11 o'clock. Yong-ho could understand it. He instinctively felt Skathak's mana from the magnetic field conquer the labyrinth of greed, get the recognition by the 12 spirits of the House of Mammon as the new king, if you become the true king of greed. Skathak smiled. Clipping her words a bit, she took a step back and widened the distance with Yong-ho, showing elegant manners to him like she met him on the first day. She concluded by saying, "You'll have a new godly energy. It's not the existing godly energy of the Demon King, but Mammon's, the king of greed. The 8th godly energy. Despite being different from all the 7 godly energies that originated from the Demon King, the new godly energy can stand up against them. I don't want to push you for it hurriedly, but it would be better for you to have a clear goal." Right, Skathak moved her hands again. Then, a black shadow erupted behind her back. It took on the form of fear. Yong-ho had seen it before. Although he saw it momentarily, he remembered it clearly. Obviously, it was one of the 12 spirits he faced when he peeked into the memories of Mammon. What's on the 2nd floor of the labyrinth of greed is Capricorn, Baphomet, the demon of slaughter. It was a vicious monster that could be called darkness itself, which reaped death with a huge scythe. It's the worst among Mammon's 12 spirits. Skathak, the immortal witch, never lied. Yong-ho knew it. He stared straight at the red eyes of the black monster formed behind her back. It was none other than magic. The monster's red eyes had mana. Yong-ho slowly closed his eyes and locked Skathak's mana transmitted through her eyes. the window of the soul, and his memories of it under his eyelids. Darkness colored the world. But it wasn't long. New colors began to color the whole world that turned black. It wasn't just Scathach's mana. Mammon's mana that he absorbed from the arena also responded. Those memories arising from that mana filled the empty spaces one by one. Yong-ho forgot himself. His 5 senses gradually became dull, and in the end, only vision and a little hearing were left. It was a black world around him. The gray sky filled with dark clouds was like a disaster. Corpses were scattered around the collapsed and broken castle gates. They were all badly disfigured bodies. The flesh and blood were randomly entangled, making it impossible to distinguish each other. Destruction was not limited to the castle gates. Yong-ho could smell the scent of rotting corpses carried by the wind from far away. It was still. Although corpses were everywhere, there was not a single crow around them. Obviously, they all ran away. The smell of death was simply so strong. The living did not dare to approach. Apparently, a child's arm was in the middle of the road. The old teddy bear, which he must have grasped to reduce his fear, was mixed with blood and pieces of flesh. It was impossible to tell if it was the child's arm or someone else's who died in this city. Just because the sky was gray, it did not mean that everything in the world lost its color. Although it was a scene of terrible destruction, the city contained many colors, as if to remember the glory of the past. Blue roofs and white walls, red and blue curtains, and gray bridges, green grass even in this place full of death. Yong-ho could realize that this city was occupied by the demon world. This could be called the human world, just like the place where Yong-ho came from. Someone stared at the teddy bear in the child's hand. The watery eyes hidden under the blue hair were full of melancholy. Scathach, the master of memory, couldn't pick up the teddy bear after all. Calming her rough breathing, she stared at the center of the city, where all the causes of death originated. Gusyeon stood next to her. He was no longer a leisurely and large-hearted man. His signature appearance in the arena. He was full of anger. The anger was so intense that the mana emanating from his fists distorted the atmosphere around him. Elune did not disturb Gusyeon. Although she covered her eyes with a red belt, she could sense it. This place was not a battlefield, nor was it a space where they confronted each other with hostilities for survival. It was a place where they committed slaughter. It was a feast of meaningless death. Elune was silent, and it meant that she was extremely angry. A black-haired knight disturbed the three. Kentauros. He was wearing silver armor and had round shields and large bows on each arm. He did not express anger like the three. He just looked at the center of the city with cold-hearted eyes. There was nothing like an expression on this middle-aged man's face with some wrinkles. "Let's go." Yong-ho heard a voice behind his back, and the owner of the voice began to walk ahead. As always, he led his members majestically, just like a king. Yong-ho couldn't read anything from that voice. It was a voice that they could interpret differently. Some would feel anger in that voice, while others would feel calm. When they approached the center of the city, the smell of death grew thicker. It looked like everything that had not lost its color, even under the gray sky, seemed to be dyed with darkness. And finally, the source of death revealed itself. A mountain of corpses piled up randomly became the throne for the incarnation of death. Sitting on it, the black monster was chewing on a leg that seemed to be the child's, with an eerie smile. Its head reminded one of a goat. The body, covered with black hair, was full of muscles that seemed to burst out anytime soon. The black monster shook its head. Then it stood up, goring its 2 huge, fierce horns in the air. It was huge. And it was mighty. Yong-ho felt his breath stopped at that. He felt different pressure from Gusyeon or Amon. It was different from the blade-like mana that he felt at the auction house. There was no hostility in that sticky one. Only pure murderous spirit was overflowing. Laughing fiercely, Gusyeon clenched his fists. Scathach also made a ferocious expression that could hardly be hers normally. Elune silently raised his hand on his lap. The black monster laughed louder. The incarnation of death, created by a lunatic religious leader by offering 10,000 believers as human sacrifices, was gladly willing to even die of himself. The monster grabbed a huge scythe. Since waking up, those it killed already exceeded hundreds of thousands. Maybe it was close to 1 million. Having harvested countless deaths, It could be called death itself. The black-haired Kentauros raised his hand. He didn't do it to pull the bow. He asked his colleagues to stop. Kentauros' light brown eyes did not illuminate the black monster. He only faced the back of the king standing silently. Yong-ho could not see Mammon's expression. As Skathash did, he had to look only at his back. Mammon raised his hand, and his action alone changed the air around him. The murderous intent of the black monster, which seemed to press down the whole world, was broken and scattered. The flames of red lotus arose. Originating in Mammon's hands, they engulfed death. It never concealed its huge power, which burnt the heaven and earth and evaporated the sea. The black monster roared. It rushed, threatening death. It looked like an overwhelming pressure, as if a big mountain was crumbling. But Mammon was not scared. He swung Ammon toward the incarnation of death, attacking from the front. No more peeking from now on, a voice was heard. At the moment, the whole world was colored with light. But darkness swallowed up everything once again. Oops! Yang-ho opened his eyes. The forgotten sensations came back to him all at once, and caused confusion. Visit and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. Chapter 123, Skirmish 1. It was the 6 kings who currently ruled the demon world. The king of pride reigning in the northern part of the demon world. The king of envy confronting the king of pride in the northeastern part. The king of lust who never moved out and was stuck in his harem. The king of gluttony, looking for opportunities in the southeast. The king of violence, who keeps silent in the west. The king of fury, the only woman among the 6 active kings. The territory of the king of fury, located in the western part of the demon kingdom, had the most borders with the territories of other kings. It bordered the territory of the king of violence to the southwest. It shared the borders with the king of lust and the king of gluttony to the east. It also shared a narrow border with the southern land, called a land without owners. Separated by the sea to the north, it shared the border with the king of pride. In other words, the territory of the king of fury shared the borders with all 6 kings, except the king of envy. Other kings' impressions about the king of fury were that he was a warmonger. No wonder he was the only king who had fought all other kings. Of course, other kings here referred to as the 6 kings. Even the king of fury couldn't fight the king of sloth, who never moved out of his place, or the king of greed that didn't exist. As was the case with the confrontation between the kings recorded in history, there really did not exist a full-scale war in which they intended to kill each other, so most of them ended up fighting lightly when they had to. The direct fighting among kings was too dangerous. Moreover, kings were aiming for the chance to attack each other. As one of the 5 directors of the Dungeon Chamber of Commerce, Orobos, the strongest monster, commented that the kings were afraid of each other's surprise attack, so they could not conduct an all-out war. The reason the king of fury was called a warmonger was not just because he wanted to confront all the other kings. She had the most experience in fighting on the battlefields. So when the fighting started, she always stood at the forefront. She even fought in battles where a king didn't have to. Thanks to this, the mortality rate of the king of fury's army was ridiculously low, even though they were mocked as the idiots who only know how to rush. It was because the king of fury always took the lead, warmonger, the one who quenches her thirst with the blood of the enemy, a crazy BTH who knows nothing but fight. That was other kings' typical description of the king of fury. But as was usually the case with such a description, most comments about the king of fury were more of a lie than a truth. Hey, you son of a BTH. Are you going to fight? Really? Crazy? Are you going to wage a real-world war? A half-naked woman on a huge bed shouted, shaking her arms and legs violently like a child. Her name was Jatara Sutra. She was none other than the king of fury, who was also the king of Gandharva, who led the 8 tribes in the demon world. She, who preferred the name of Dratara because she might twist her tongue while pronouncing Dratara Sutra, drooped down her slim and white arms and legs as if she was tired of shouting. When it came to the king of fury, people thought of her as one with a grim and ghostly look, but she was far from that. Gandharva, her original tribe, boasted of stunning beauty among her 8 tribes. One could feel her softness just by looking at her dark blue hair. Her long and thin limbs were nice and beautiful. but only her eyes were a little different. Her eyes, with 5 colored lights, which was hard to describe, was scary rather than beautiful. People looking at her had fear because of her eyes. Like the Gandharva race, her body smelled very sweet. The horsetail protruding from her hips did not get tangled with each other no matter how much she swayed, nor did it lose its luster even in the midst of a sandstorm. The King of Fury caught her breath while huffing and puffing. She really tried hard not to be furious. Contrary to popular images of her as a warmonger, or rather, she likes the fight itself, but she didn't like the consequences of the fight. A war was supposed to kill lots of people. Moreover, a war produced not only numerous orphans and widows, but it also burned everything in the world. The reason why the King of Fury always stood at the forefront of the army was simple. To her, that was the way to reduce the number of deaths the most. An overwhelming force deprived her soldiers of combat opportunities. That meant that their chances of dying were also reduced. At the same time, it could minimize the death toll of the enemy, unless they were the same kind of king. Who in the world would want to fight the King of Fury? Those enemies who confronted the King of Fury chose to run away or surrender. Sometimes they challenged her, but she could easily win by killing their leader. Nobody believed this, but the King of Fury was a pacifist. What was the point of fighting each other in the wretched demon world? However, the King of Fury was both a pacifist and a realist, so she realized well that pacifism in the demon world was a vain delusion. For this reason, the King of Fury did not preach pacifism to his subordinates, although she wished for it deep down. It's really annoying. So annoying. The King of Fury was so upset that she was about to go crazy. But the fact that she really shouldn't be furious at this moment made her even crazier. If she really got angry, her fury would awaken. The awakening of that force, fury, one of the 7 deadly sins, would be the worst situation. The King of Fury hated herself, whose fury awakened as much as a war. So she took a deep breath once more, counting the numbers she learned from the King of Violence the other day, and memorizing the scriptures of the alien world helped her calm down her fury a lot. Thank you, Uncle. I got helped again today. The King of Fury, who briefly thanked the King of Violence, the only one that could stop her when the force of her fury was activated, covered her face with both hands. Then she gave it a thought seriously. When the King of Pride and the King of Envy began to interfere with each other's dungeon spirits, she didn't feel interested because their actions were nothing new. But the situation was getting worse. If the situation was left escalating like this, an all-out war among kings would be possible in hundreds of years. It couldn't be better if the King of Pride and the King of Envy met each other in a secluded place, fighting for death, and both died. But that was not the reality. It was clear that their confrontation would result in an enormous number of casualties. Moreover, their fighting would most likely escalate. Obviously, other kings would intervene. Popular criticism of the King of Lust was that he was crazy about sex. Stuck in his harem, he indulged himself in drinking and sex. However, such criticism was also much of a lie like that about the King of Fury. The King of Fury, who had actually encountered the King of Lust, knew the truth better than anyone else. The King of Lust was a terrifying figure. If he had a chance to confront the King of Pride and the King of Envy, he would end his seclusion and stand up against them. There was also the King of Gluttony. This ignorantly large pig always openly revealed his greed. Unlike the King of Fury, who was always worried about the possible breakout of an all-out war between the King of Pride and the King of Envy, he would, obviously, wait for them to fight earnestly. What was even more funny was that this wasn't the worst. If either the King of Pride or the King of Envy would win more easily than expected, and as a result, the two sins and godly energy were concentrated into one. It was evident that a huge fire of war would devour the entire demon world. In that case, not only her race, Gandharva, but also her 8 tribes and the demon world as a whole would groan in the face of the disaster of a world war. King of Pride, you son of a BTH, stop it now. There was a limit to the pressure that she could put on the King of Envy, whose territory didn't share the border with that of the King of Fury. That was why the King of Fury turned her sword to the King of Pride. She concentrated her naval forces in the north to attack the rear of the King of Pride. If you fight the King of Envy as you do now, I will attack you from behind. So stop fighting here. However, It was questionable whether her strategy would work. The King of Fury finally sighed again. The southern region was also noisy. The empty land in the south, an abandoned land. A war was going on even there. However, it was only a storm in a teacup. The possibility was almost none that the battle there would affect the entire demon world. But why did she care? Strangely enough, she was bothered by the war in the southern region. She felt as if she was missing something. The King of Fury shook her head. It was a useless worry. She could not afford to pay attention to the southern region. Now was the time for her to focus on the north. The King of Fury stood up from her bed, then looked at the entire map of the demon world that filled one side of her spacious room, especially the house of Mammon located at the southern edge, but she looked at it only briefly. The days of the King of Greed ended a long time ago. She didn't have to worry. Her 5-colored eyes turned north. The sound of her sigh spread in the spacious room again. Chapter 144, Skirmish 2. It was impossible for Yong-ho to completely regain Amon's power with just one evolution, but it was definitely a step forward. Amon's power was in a different league. Yong-ho definitely felt that way. He was thrilled with Amon's power. Of course, Amon's power required that much mana. So much so that although Yong-ho himself was in a different league with 5 horns, even he felt that Amon's power was simply too overwhelming. Amon did not have a clear shape on his hand. It could be described as the spear of flames at best. Despite that, Catalina was awakened by Amon's power that shook the entire Garden of Life. However, Yong-ho couldn't afford to glance at Catalina. 2 lights emerged from the magnetic field on his left hand. One was aqua blue, a symbol of Skathach, the immortal witch, and the other one was dark red, a symbol of Amon, the demon spear of the Red Lotus. Yong-ho closed his eyes, then faced the burning world. Not darkness, my little master. The flaming eyes looked down at Yong-ho. It was Amon's soul that he had encountered several times. But it was different from now. Yong-ho could feel Amon closer. Can we talk like this even if I don't go to the arena? Not always. However, it is possible, though in a limited way, when you release my power like now. Yong-ho laughed awkwardly. It's because Amon was outrageously eating away at his mana. He could talk with Amon now, because Amon could release a powerful mana thanks to his sudden evolution, and he gave Skathach mana subtly, but he wouldn't do it next time. It was questionable whether Amon could maintain his current status even for several minutes, even when he was focusing on fighting, let alone talking with Yong-ho. However, it meant that Amon had such a powerful strength. It was clear that Amon went one step closer to the power Mammon exercised. You may have heard it from Skathach. Conquer the labyrinth of greed and subdue the 12 spirits of Mammon. Then you will be able to complete the godly energy of the King of Greed. I believe you can succeed in it. Yong-ho found Amon's voice strict and serious, but at the same time deeply affectionate. His kindness was clearly different from Skathach's. Yong-ho became somewhat embarrassed, so he changed the topic, feigning innocence. Come to think of it, if Skathach's star sign is Aquarius and Baphomet's is Capricorn, are they in the zodiac? The zodiac signs meant the 12 constellations that divided the sun's orbit. Could it be true that there were 12 zodiac signs in the demon world, like the human world? Yes. Mammon, my master, said that the 12 zodiac signs were learned from a different world. Probably, this knowledge originated from your hometown, little master. It was not true that the 12 zodiac signs existed in the demon world. However, it was clear that Amon used the 12 zodiac signs as a motif and named the 12 spirits of the House of Mammon. Yong-ho himself was the descendant of the descendants left behind by Mammon in the human world. There was nothing strange about the fact that Mammon had knowledge of the human world. So what is your star sign, Amon? What about Gusion's and Elun's? Gusion's star sign is Taurus, and Elun's is Libra. I've no particular star sign. My master said that I had better have an extra star sign, because there was nothing befitting me. Actually, I am somewhat alien, even among the 12 spirits. Wait a moment. If you don't have one, isn't it true that 12 zodiac signs are not complete from the beginning? Yes. Moreover, there were a lot of vacancies since some of the spirits already died. This is my little wish. I think it's good for you to fill the vacancies with new dungeon spirits. Spesta. You can complete the 12 new spirits by combining those from the old and new generations. Unlike his usual attitude, Amon spoke in a little excited tone. Yong-ho laughed pleasantly. The names of each of the 12 zodiac signs came to his mind. Which one was good for Catalina, Virgo or Aries? As if he already read Yong-ho's mind, Amon blinked. Libra would suit your escort girl. She is Alun's successor in many ways. Yong-ho was bothered by his mention of various ways, but he laughed it off. Amon continued, and you may think I'm meddling too much, but I hope that you can put off your right to claim your wish that you obtained the other day. 2. I hope you can put it off until after you defeat Baphomet or the gang of the Western region. Yong-ho blinked at that, because he never expected it. Moreover, Amon mentioned even his right to claim his wish. Amon continued calmly while he was at a loss about how to respond. Whenever I think of you and your escort girl's right to claim the wish granted by Kaiwan, I see the little master's desire is overflowing. Given the power of greed, it's clear that you are going to use it carefully. It is a catalyst of great power. This does not mean that you should not use the right to claim your wish at all. If you postpone its use too much, you will not be able to use it as a catalyst. Project your desire more purely, tenanely, not delusional sexual desires, but what you, little master, really want. Amon was extremely serious, which made Yong-ho even more embarrassed. It was as if his parents discovered a secret folder that he had hidden. Yong-ho wanted to tell Amon that he should not be so serious about talking about such stuff, but he didn't. Moreover, Amon's last words needed to be heard seriously. Amon laughed again, then said in a blazing flame, "My little master, I believe it, just as surely that day will come. I mean the day when I will call you my master, not little master." Amon was the same as always. Confirming his sincerity, Yong-ho smiled brightly. As he said in front of Skathak, Yong-ho straightened himself and responded, "It won't take so long. I look forward to it." The green flames came out of the red lotus, which soon engulfed the whole world. Yong-ho closed his eyes, then opened his eyes again to face reality. Time passed fairly for everyone. The moment when Yong-ho talked face to face, there were new developments in the empty western and eastern areas. The house heads in the eastern region were never stupid. They could predict the future based on their judgment of the future. They were safe now. It was funny to discuss safety in the midst of dungeon battles following the turbulence caused by Embryo. But it was a fact. While Embryo, who occupied the northern region, attacked the western region, the eastern region was also in great turmoil. The successive dungeon battles produced winners and losers, and from the moment the number of losers began to surpass that of winners, the eastern region gained a strange peace. The increased risk held back reckless action. Moreover, the surviving winners' power was big enough to threaten each other. It was as if the 6 kings who were ruling the current demon world could not engage in such a conflict because they checked against each other. In other words, they entered the so-called Cold War status. In the midst of this turmoil, Agadez, who might break the balance of power recklessly, was removed. Moreover, since he was not removed by anybody in the eastern region, there was little possibility that the pendulum of power would swing to one side. The house heads in the eastern region finally recovered their peace of mind and looked around. In just a few months, the situation in the southern abandoned area changed completely. Several dozens of househeads over there were reduced to 14 or 15, all told, in the whole southern area. Some of them were killed by others, while others gave up their status as the Demon King and chose to become their dungeon spirits. The northern region was devastated. The only Demon King left behind there was Embryo, the Demon King of Wolves. The destruction of the western region was underway. The Western Owners Alliance, who rose triumphantly, were facing the last fight. To simply discuss the number of troops, they were numerically superior to Embryo's forces, but few believed in their victory. It was the southern region that produced the most unexpected results. People often referred to the southern region without owners as an abandoned land. The southern region was just an abandoned land in the vast south. The number of househeads there was the least compared with other regions, and the distance between the dungeons was also long. It was truly amazing that such a region stood out amid the turmoil, the House of Mammon. It was no exaggeration to say that the house perished, no matter how wonderful its past glory was. Moreover, the head of the House of Mammon defeated Agares, who was considered to be the strongest in the entire blank area in the south. Now, the house heads in the eastern region had to recognize that the House of Mammon in the south was no longer a fallen family. It was a powerful family that could exert influence over the entire deserted area. The house heads in the eastern region thought of the future. What was Embryo's next move? Would it be right for him to sit in the eastern region and watch the western region go to ruins? The heads of the two houses that divided the eastern region joined hands instead of fighting to decide each other's superiority. Now wasn't the time for them to fight. Their priority was to deal with the wolves approaching them from afar. The heads of two houses began to move. Their activities were not confined to the eastern region. Is this the result? Ophelia, who returned to the Free City to deal with urgent affairs, calmly asked the uninvited guest in front of her. Instead of looking at him, she glanced at a small box on top of an oak bar. The small box had a wet bottom, and what wetted the bottom was a red liquid that flowed out of the box. The uninvited guest responded by acting. With a gentle smile, he opened the lid of the box. Ophelia did not smile, nor did she frown. Her gaze was cold to hide her agitation. In the box was an object that she guessed when she heard it. Chwyrong's daughter. It was her severed head, the head of the House of Abigail. The uninvited guest did not cover the lid again. Ophelia rolled her eyes to stare at the uninvited guest. He was a devil from one of the 8 tribes, who was hard to find in the southern region. He was covered with green skin, close to blue, dressed in a spacious attire common anywhere. He had a strong build, and his face had a sea urchin-like beard that matched well with his sharp ring eyes, symbolizing a devil. He said, "It's just a gift of friendship. It's always fun to get rid of the troubles in your neighborhood." Chapter 155, Skirmish 3. The uninvited guest had a snake-like tongue. Ophelia knew he was very cunning, and she did not forget that it was a gift, but at the same time, it was a display of strength. It was true that the House of Abigail was on the verge of collapse. Besides, Chwiryong's daughter was so weak that she could not be compared with Phoras or Chwyrong. But even so, she was the owner of her own dungeon. She was the owner of a dungeon heavily fortified. Even though Ophelia was watching Chwyrong's daughter sharply, she did not know her death until the uninvited guest appeared. The house heads in the eastern region showed that they could infiltrate the southern region anytime and kill the head of any house stealthily. Instead of an ambiguous diplomatic language, Ophelia spoke directly. "So, you want me to be an anvil in return for your being a hammer, right?" "Great, that's correct. If you guys in the southern area stop Embryo, we in the eastern region will attack the northern region without losing the momentum." The uninvited guest also replied straightforwardly. Ophelia gently rubbed the smooth surface of the bar with her fingertips. It was virtually his unilateral notification as follows. "Now that the western region is being attacked, we won't attack the northern region, for we want Embryo to completely destroy the western region. But at the same time, we don't want Embryo to occupy the southern region because Embryo will become too strong in that case. We will plant hope in the House of Mammon, so they won't surrender, for we want the House of Mammon to fully confront Embryo that destroyed both the northern and the western regions." Ophelia thought to herself. In other words, you guys in the eastern region want to subdue Embryo and the House of Mammon, fully exhausted after occupying the northern region and devastating the western region. She clearly read his intention, but she found it meaningless to argue with him here. Regardless of what the future holds for them, the eastern region was an ally of the House of Mammon, given the current situation. "We've left the dungeon of the House of Abigail as it was. I hope it will be of any help to the House of Mammon. Thank you for your hospitality." "You're welcome. You are the one who got rid of Agares, who were running wild everywhere. Our master is really grateful to the House of Mammon." They were done talking. Finally, Ophelia bowed him out with a smile, while the uninvited guest left the tavern leisurely like he did when he entered. Counting the number in her heart, Ophelia closed the lid of the box, thinking time passed a lot since he left. Looking out the window, she saw the sun setting, but she couldn't hesitate. It seemed like she had to run all night today. It was at dawn when Yong Ho met Ophelia. Since he fell asleep late at night, he was very tired. but he couldn't avoid Ophelia, who ran here all night. As soon as Ophelia was done briefing, he closed his eyes and asked what came to mind first. How did you deal with the body of Chwiryong's daughter? I came here after ordering her burial, after a simple funeral. Well done. He was serious. He didn't have any grudge against Chwiryong's daughter, who he had never seen. In some respects, she was a pitiful woman. The next question he asked Ophelia was how she would respond to the unilateral notification by the uninvited guest from the eastern region. It was no exaggeration to say that her response was already decided. Let's take over the house of Abigail first. It is impossible for us to fortify at this point. How about using it as a dummy? The heart of the dungeon of the house of Abigail was highly likely to be good food for Lucia. However, Lucia didn't necessarily need it. It would have been desperate food for the house of Mammon in the past, but it was only one of its options now. Ophelia said, I think it's better to use it like a dummy too. If you pretend to reinforce it a little, it will be difficult for outsiders to guess the dungeon's defense condition. Rickham, a counselor to Yong-ho like Ophelia, was now staying in the house of Randolt. Since Yong-ho and Ophelia agreed, there was no reason for Rickham to oppose. Yong-ho told Ophelia to rest, then wrote a simple command. It was a letter ordering the crazy Oros in the Free City to occupy the house of Abigail. A few hours later, Ophelia, who woke up at almost lunchtime, embarrassed Yong-ho a lot. Right to claim your wish. Sounds like a really good idea. Fortunately, you have become strong. Thanks to the little master, I myself feel motivated to hear that. Ophelia already heard from Lucia about what was going on, but she was still curious about what happened for the past several days when she was away. So, as soon as Ophelia woke up, she grabbed Yong-ho's escort girl Catalina and inquired about what had happened. Just like a good and innocent girl, Catalina told her about even what she didn't have to. It was only natural that she was completely debriefed by Ophelia, formerly a veteran intelligence peddler. Among what she confided to Ophelia was the reason why the power of the dungeon spirits grew rapidly. The godly energy of the king of greed that Skathak mentioned, the evolution of Armen, the magic spear of the Red Lotus, and the existence of Baphomet, the worst spirit located on the second floor of the Labyrinth of Greed. Each of them was interesting to Ophelia, but what caught Ophelia's attention personally was the right to ask for a wish that Kaiwan granted to Catalina and Yong-ho. Watching Ophelia talking to Eligos in the training field cheerfully like a lively girl, Yong-ho shook his head. He didn't look at Catalina, who was checking his mood with her ears and tail drooping, as if she now realized she leaked a secret. Instead, he watched Eligos, who was greatly embarrassed. Eligos was mounting a sophisticated attack on the pretext of sparring, but the training field was also a place where they exchanged physical affection naturally. Besides, Ophelia mentioned she would grant his wish on the excuses of inspiring his motivation. Since Eligos could not outtalk Ophelia, he was desperately asking Yong-ho to intervene, but it was useless. Yong-ho ignored him by cruelly turning his head. Sorry, Eligos. Their sparring sounds like fun. Although Yong-ho felt terrible whenever he was mocked by Aemon, he enjoyed being an onlooker at this moment. He was also curious about what kind of wish Ophelia would say to Eligos. Well, like Ophelia said, this is going to motivate him a lot. Yong-ho didn't need to be flustered just because the eastern and western regions were in turmoil. Since the House of Mammon was taking care of what was necessary in an orderly manner, it would be better for Yong-ho to relax with small events like this. Perhaps having heard the rumor, the dungeon spirits of the House of Mammon began to arrive at the training field to watch the fight between Eligos and Ophelia. As it was the break time after lunch, not only Goblin Rangers, but also Orcs, and even Bergrim and Traiant came out. Uriah and Baduk sat next to Catalina. Given the situation at the moment, Eligos had no other choice but to fight. There was a fight a man could not avoid in his life, and this was the one for Eligos. Eligos revealed all three horns and displayed all his might. The dungeon spirits of the House of Mammon were greatly agitated by the butler's power that they had never seen before. Eligos was much stronger than expected. Ophelia smiled cheerfully at Eligos' muscles that had swollen like a beast. She also spared no strength. She showed all her might by revealing a fourth horn. The dungeon spirits were shocked and got agitated again after seeing that Orcs, the born fighters, clenched their fists and swallowed, watching the fight. Bergrim kept his eyes narrow to watch the two on the training field. Let me start. Hope him in your good hands, brother." Shortly after exchanging greetings, the two red demons kicked off the ground at the same time. They rushed at each other with terrifying speed. It was truly breathless sparring, a head-to-head battle in which neither chickened out was going on. Yong-ho was freshly shocked. Eligos' growth was beyond imagination. Yong-ho took him to small battles a few times, so he knew he became strong. But little did he realize that this old butler became so strong since then. He is almost as strong as Ophelia when she entered the House of Mammon. No, it was different this time. He was stronger than Ophelia. Ophelia gave Eligos the right path. Eligos' beast-like offensive rooted in his Herculean power, producing tremendous offensive power. As far as his hurtling toward his opponent was concerned, Eligos might be the strongest among the dungeon spirits of the House of Mammon. Ophelia blocked Eligos' attack effectively. Considering that she was his teacher, her skills were remarkable. Everyone in the House of Mammon, including Yong-ho, was absorbed into their sparring. However, their sparring did not last long. About 2 minutes or so passed when Eligos punched her hard. Since his punch was on the target, she couldn't block or avoid it, so she bounced back because of the impact. The orc shouted at that moment, but Eligos, who punched her in the face, was very embarrassed. He was even worried that Ophelia was wounded by the punch. In fact, he threw the punch aimlessly, but as it turned out, Ophelia, not anyone else, was hit directly by the punch. "Oops, you beat me. You've gotten a lot stronger." Brother Ophelia, who fell somewhat seductively, spoke cheerfully. Eligos was embarrassed again. The orcs, shouting in joy, now realized that something was wrong, but she did not care what they thought. She gently raised his upper body and said, whispering with a fox-like expression, "Now, what kind of wish would you, Brother Eli, ask of me? I hope it's not something trifling." Ophelia tilted her head slightly. Everybody in the training field kept silent, watching them. Chapter 16, Skirmish for Eligos, couldn't say anything with a stupid expression, and Yong-ho, a real man who graduated from an all-male middle school, high school, and college, just blinked. Wow! On the other hand, Catalina, Uriah, and Lucia moaned in admiration. Alarmed by their reaction, Yong-ho suddenly came to his senses. He felt there was something these women should not have learned from Ophelia's interaction with Eligos. But it was too late. Eligos, who was moving his lips without saying anything, turned to Yong-ho. Again, he was desperately signaling him for help, but Yong-ho ignored it at once. Paying particular attention to Catalina and Uriah, he walked ahead and left the training field. Ophelia, scary girl. Shaking his head from side to side, Yong-ho looked back at Catalina slightly, as if she discovered something new. Moved by the romantic interaction between Eligos and Ophelia, Catalina's gleaming eyes seemed very dangerous. And 2 days later, Yong-ho met Skull, who hastily returned from the House of Randalt and headed underground with all of his dungeon spirits. They were in front of the second floor of the Labyrinth of Greed. They launched the attack on the Gate of Hell, the massacre demon Baphomet's place. The first floor of the Labyrinth of Greed, the Garden of Life, was literally a garden. Therefore, it was as good as an open place. With no facilities to defend against the enemy, there was only a beautiful scenery that suited the castle of the Great King. However, the second floor, Gate of Hell, was different. Indeed, this was the beginning of the castle of the Demon King. It was the first door at the end of the beautiful garden. Regardless of an ally or an enemy, anyone who wanted to enter the labyrinth of the King of Greed must pass it. The passage connecting the first and second floors was very huge. It was no exaggeration to say that the whole room located in the opposite direction from Shaftak's room was a passage leading to the second floor. When they passed through a huge arched door decorated with trees, vines, and colorful flowers, a staircase wide enough for dozens to pass at the same time appeared before them. A film of soft mana blocked the space between the first and second floors, so it was impossible to discern what space was under the stairs. Yong-ho came here with the minimum number of dungeon spirits he selected in person. They were 4 dungeon spirits of the House of Mammon, Salami, Bucephalus, and 4 skeleton knights that stood out among Skull Squad. Under the influence of the Encatropegnium, a huge mountain on the dungeon of the Mammon family, called the End of the World, those dungeon monsters were far more powerful than the normal dungeons that appeared in the House of Mammon. And this tendency got worse as they went down to the deep floor. On the second floor, there would probably be dungeon monsters more powerful than those on the first floor. Moreover, since the second floor was an entrance, it was highly likely that traps were installed, unlike the first floor. When she met Young-ho, Skathash did not specifically mention the structure of the second floor or the traps installed. However, she recommended that he take only the elite members rather than mobilizing a motley group. Going about 10 meters down the stairs, he stood in front of a canopy of subtle mana. The stairs also ran down to the canopy as if they stretched down the lake. Young-ho didn't bother to look back. After smiling at himself, he stepped beyond the canopy. He felt as if he dipped his feet in the water. Instead of stopping, he speeded up. He quickly crossed the canopy and entered the second floor. The air changed. It was different from its freshness on the first floor. It was quite different from the Garden of Life that made him feel that it was cute despite its vastness, for it contained a mountain, a field, and a lake. It was such a huge space. The whole second floor was a huge space. The ceiling was over 40 meters high, and the floor was real earth, not stone. Beyond the wilderness reminiscent of the Free City was erected a truly massive castle wall. It was exactly as Skathak said. Young-ho didn't think that the space he was standing now was inside the dungeon. He almost made a forced smile at the vastness of the second floor. Oh my God. Catalina, who passed through the canopy after Young-ho, opened her mouth wide. She decided she would not be surprised no matter what she saw, but she never imagined that she would face the vast wilderness and high walls before her eyes. To talk about its functions alone, it was like the gathering place on the first floor of the House of Mammon. In other words, it was like a combat space where they secured a large space first to block the enemies with defense facilities. The only difference was the size of the space. If Young-ho made the gathering place, assuming the fight among a few dozens, the second floor of the Labyrinth of Greed assumed thousands. Rather, it seemed possible to assume tens of thousands of forces at this scale. Eligos, who crossed the canopy after Catalina, kept gulping at the spectacular scene. He couldn't even imagine that there would be a place like this in the basement of the Hosu of Mammon, where he had been staying for decades. He was aware there was a basement, but he just thought there were literally several basements. Moreover, this was not the end. This was only the second floor, 13th floor. Young-ho got goosebumps at the thought of it. It was the thing of the distant past, more than 1,000 years ago, but Young-ho could feel how powerful the House of Mammon was in the past. Let's go. Young-ho could not afford to be overwhelmed. He came here to conquer the second floor, not for sightseeing. Salami, who was already embarrassed in the Garden of Life, opened his eyes wide. Bucephalus also went down the stairs with a confused look. There was a wilderness of about 100 tens of meters from the end of the stairs to the wall. The wall was in contact with the ceiling. Therefore, the only way to enter the castle was to destroy the gate or the wall. After getting on Salami's back, Young-ho looked far away. There were many large and small scars on the grey wall that looked as strong as deep-rooted trees. There were a lot of embrasures for a long-range attack, and there were a couple of stone statues of a fierce-looking giant on the left and right side of the huge castle gate, which seemed to be 20 meters high. When Young-ho looked closely, there weren't only two statues. Stone statues in the shape of giants or monsters were seen at regular intervals. Some were so severely damaged that they could not be identified. The statues were still far away, but they were so huge that Young-ho could only recognize shapes roughly. Catalina and Eligos once again expressed pure admiration. But Young-ho was different. From the moment he saw the stone statues, he felt a strange anxiety. No way. At that moment, he saw something else. The flow of mana that was being released from the wall engulfed the statues, vast space and wide ramparts. Would Young-ho deal with the invading enemy with long-range weapons? Was there no other way than opening the wall for the hand-to-hand fighting? He got the answer soon. The stone statues standing on the left and right of the castle gate took a huge step. They didn't roar or shout. Their giant stomping replaced it. The ground was shaken sonorously, which was as good as an earthquake. The stone statues saw Young-ho at the same time. Then they rushed at him immediately. "Let's go," Young-ho yelled. It was not a retreat order. He had Salami spread the wings of flame. There were 4 stone statues on the move. In the past, They would have run away without fighting, but they would not now. Just the huge stone statues alone could not stop Yong-ho himself and his dungeon spirits. Salami flapped the wings hugely. The dungeon spirits triggered Brigadier at once. Catalina spread her wings made of black mana and defended Yong-ho, who soared, scattering flames. Elagos and Ophelia kicked off the ground at the same time. They concentrated mana on their fists and legs. At the same time, they revealed their horns. Skull lifted the battle hammer. The battle hammer, reborn in Bergram's hand, did not simply save Skull's lightning strike. The lightning spell cast on the battle hammer itself strengthened. Skull's lightning strike, Bucephalus charged at them. The members of Skull's squad, who got on their respective nightmare horse, followed their captain and raised their magic weapons. It was only 100 meters of distance between them. The moment they ran toward each other, there occurred the first collision. Ignoring the giants, Yong-ho flew toward the city gate. Catalina, who was separated from Yong-ho after soaring, saw the stone statue on the left. She strongly wished she could stand near Yong-ho. As the escort knight for the King of Greed, she wanted to stand by him. She needed the power to do it. She needed the power to be able to walk with him side by side. The darkness of greed rose from Catalina's fingertips. In an instant, it became huge before turning into a black blade. The stone statue could not attack Catalina. It was impossible for the statue to even look back at her passing by its side at a tremendous speed. The stone statue's head fell to the floor. The moment it slid along the cleanly cut surface and touched the ground, Elagos and Ophelia threw their punches at it. Bang! Although the two attacked the statue, there was only one noise heard. Elagos, who jumped high, punched the giant's abdomen, which resulted in massive destruction. The stone statue, with a broken hole in its stomach, collapsed from its knees. Ophelia did the same thing. On the stone statue, where she gored with her horns, was a trace of a huge whirlpool. With a hole in its chest, the stone fell back. Skull shouted. Chapter 17. Skirmish 5. Outpowering the collapsing statues. Skull looked up. The last remaining statue struck Skull with a sword. Instead of running away, Bucephalus rushed at the sword. At Skull's order, Bucephalus climbed not only the blade of the sword, but also the stone statue's arm. Bucephalus was done with it so quickly that the statue could not even withdraw its arms. When it shook its arms vigorously, Bucephalus was already about to attack its collarbone. The lightning of greed flashed from Skull's right arm. The battle hammer that swallowed up a lot of lightning hit the stone statue's jaw. The sound of the attack was different from when Elagos or Ophelia mounted the attack. The lightning strike exploded not only the stone's jaw, but also the air. The shattered head of the stone statue scattered in all directions. Skull Bucephalus stepped in the air. It created a scaffold made of dark magic where its feet touched, which was the unique driving method of the upper nightmare horse flying in the sky. When the fourth stone statue collapsed, Yong-ho turned to Aemon. He shot Aemon engulfed in the green flames at the castle gate, right before his eyes. Break through the gate. It couldn't be called flames anymore. A great greed swallowed up black mana. It transformed Aemon into a huge ballista. An incredible physical force hit the gate. The gate crumbled with a terrifying noise. Actually, it was separated from the wall as it could not withstand the impact. Salami entered the castle and hurriedly flapped its wings of flames. He almost fell to the ground due to the aftermath of the terrible blow, but he adroitly kept his balance before landing safely. Yong-ho also groaned in pain because he felt like his right arm would fall off. At the same time, he felt a strong pleasure in the fact that he destroyed the gate with a single blow. Yong-ho looked back from Salamis behind. The artificial sunlight poured over the broken gate. The dungeon spirits of the House of Mammon followed Yong-ho, fully releasing their own mana. Yong-ho looked ahead again. He had no intention of stopping. There were a series of wide spaces inside the wall. It seemed that Mammon thought of the second floor of the Labyrinth of Greed as the continuation of the huge gathering places, namely, places for large-scale engagement. Because of this, the passage was wide, and the size of each room was also unusually large. Yong-ho moved forward without hesitation. Dozens of dungeon monsters appeared in droves, but they couldn't stop the advance of Yong-ho and his spirits. Whenever the flames, lightning, and darkness rained down, they were destroyed en masse. Fortunately, there were few traps along the way. According to Ophelia, there were traces of a huge magic position or traps all over the second floor. However, most of them reached the end of their lifespan or were severely damaged and destroyed, which was natural. It was already hundreds of years ago that the House of Mammon lost the second floor of the Labyrinth of Greed. During that long period of time, Mammon's people were not supplied with properly and used up mana in dealing with the dungeon monsters coming up everywhere. In some respects, I wonder if we are now benefiting from the dungeon monsters Yong-ho was referring to, the trap of the Labyrinth of Greed. If properly activated, the trap would have been a much greater threat than the dungeon monsters. Yong-ho only went straight ahead, following Scathach's advice. Baphomet is the last barrier on the second floor, as well as its gatekeeper. The passage leading to the third floor is beyond Baphomet's sealed paper. To get there, you just have to go straight. The previous king was a very bold man. She was right. After he passed through 5 large rooms following the castle gate, he saw a straight path. With Catalina's power, he looked through the darkness to find a huge door. It was clear that it was the door leading to Baphomet's sealed paper. Yong-ho, who ordered his dungeon spirits to just move on until now, told them to stop for a moment. All of my dungeon spirits have become strong. They really fought much better than he expected. In fact, he was busy taking care of his own growth until now, but his dungeon spirits made a big progress too. Especially, Eligos drew his attention. Ophelia had been recognized as a strong woman in his mind since she entered the House of Mammon. In the case of Catalina, he felt it was natural that she became strong since she was around him as his escort knight all the time. But Eligos was an exception. He was the one who guarded the House of Mammon alone even when all the other dungeon spirits were fighting on the battlefield. Eligos didn't show all his skills when he sparred with Ophelia. His sparring partner was Ophelia. Regardless of his denial or not, Eligos cherished her very much. How could he display his real skills when she was his sparring partner? But Eligos was different when the opponent was the dungeon monster. He fully displayed his real skills while fighting the dungeon monster Yong-ho, understood why Eligos' name for his next advancement was Tyrant. He attacked the dungeon monsters fiercely, just like a hungry beast catching its prey. His fierce attack completely belied his usual appearance, so Yong-ho was shocked by such a stark contrast. Yong-ho smiled before he knew it when he recalled the days when he had just become the head of the House of Mammon, for he clearly remembered the small Eligos, who went out to draw water every morning. Then he looked at Skull. When it came to the amount of training, no dungeon spirit of the House of Mammon could surpass Skull. That was why Yong-ho trusted Skull all the more. Moreover, Skull played a very important role in the battle against Baphomet. Scathach chose Yong-ho himself and Skull as the key players in this battle because of the characteristics of Baphomet. Death. Baphomet was the incarnation of death sent by fanatics in the alien world. Because of this, even though he was weakened, he exhaled the energy of death naturally like his breathing. Those whose energy was weak lost their lives just by being exposed to Baphomet's energy. Even those strong men saw their strength weakened because of their instinctive fear of death. It was only Yong-ho and Skull who could exert full combat power even in front of Baphomet's energy of death. After experiencing more than hundreds of near-death experiences, Yong-ho could endure the energy of death. Since the undead Skull was already dead, he would rather feel calm in the face of Baphomet's energy of death. It was because of Baphomet that Scathach's test was a near-death experience from the beginning. Anyone who did not pass her test could never be an opponent of Baphomet. Yong-ho patted Skull on the shoulder, who he thought was always reliable. Skull laughed heartily when he felt Yong-ho's confidence in him without regard to Skull. Yong-ho was not in a hurry. He kept sharing the magic potion he obtained from the arena with the dungeon spirits. The restorative Scathach made for him also played a great role. About 30 minutes passed. They caught their breath fully by now. Yong-ho ordered Salami, Bucephalus, and the Skull Squad to stand by. He then sprayed the lights into the passage. After driving away the darkness, they went forward. It was a huge bronze door. Yong-ho realized that the name of the second floor, Gate of Hell, referred to this door. Dozens of people were embossed on the door. They were groaning and crying in pain. Yong-ho took his breath deeply and held the doorknob. By Herculean force, he opened the gate of hell very slowly. It was filled with impenetrable darkness. But he could see, rather he felt it. A black monster fell in the middle of the wide, empty area. Large shackles were attached to its neck as well as its limbs, and those tied on its legs were still connected to the floor. The door was not yet opened halfway. However, the energy of death came out continuously. The black monster raised its head slowly, crying in a spooky voice. It was laughing. Its creepy laugh filled the empty place with the energy of death. Red eyes, Yong-ho remembered seeing them when he peeked into Skathak's memory. The black monster shook its shoulders. It touched the floor with its hands and raised its upper body very slowly. It stared at Yong-ho with its red eyes shining alone in the dark. Yong-ho was scared. It was much more dreary than what he saw in her memory. He felt like Skathak saying that it had become weak was an absurd lie. Death wrapped around his body. He could feel hundreds, rather thousands of eyes around. The screaming of resentful ghosts filled the whole world. But Yong-ho opened the door. He didn't close it. Then he took a step forward in the darkness. Brigada was activated at once. His dungeon spirits followed their king, Yong-ho, just like Mammon's 12 spirits had done in the past. They were not terrified by the fear of death. Yong-ho didn't have to say any more. He quietly raised his hand. Like Mammon in his memory, he grabbed Aemon, the magic spear of the red lotus that bloomed in the air. He drove away not only darkness, but also the energy of death with the green flames of greed. The blue water, which was like the symbol of Skathak, spewed out from the uncompleted godly energy located in the magic field of his left hand. Baphomet laughed like crazy. His crazy laughing soon turned into a roar. Baphomet saw Mammon in Yong-ho. So, it cursed him and got crazy. Grabbing the scythe of death from the darkness, it charged at Yong-ho wildly. It was like the rush of death itself. Yong-ho also rushed forward to confront it. As the new king of greed, he confronted the incarnation of death. Chapter 18, Outburst of Anguish 1. It wasn't the first time Yong-ho had faced the monster. He encountered it when he first faced Aemon, when he met its eyes in a burning world, when he encountered Gusyeon in the arena, and the moment Skathak revealed her skills for a very short time. He remembered it all, and he didn't forget the horrible feeling at that time. He was always overwhelmed by its absurdly enormous presence. He felt the same thing this time. Baphomet lost its strength as a dungeon spirit because it lost its master. Besides, it was extremely weakened since it had been sealed for a long time and shorn of its strength by the other 12 spirits. Nonetheless, it was the incarnation of death that came from the alien world. It was so huge. So Yong-ho felt like he would be trampled by this absurdly huge creature at any moment. But this time, it was different. It had to be different. He had to face this monster and defeat it. Instead of stepping back, he boldly advanced and confronted Baphomet head-on, which rushed toward him without hesitation, like a runaway locomotive. Baphomet's body was huge. It was somewhat different from what he saw in Skathak's memory, but its head, resembling a black goat, and its huge body were the same as before. It looked like a mountain seemed to collapse in front of his eyes. Laughing like crazy, Baphomet wielded the scythe of death. It was wielding from above the power of death itself. Yong-ho did not miss that moment. He opened his eyes and saw death rushing to him. It had a trajectory, but what was seen wasn't everything. Black mana swirled around the blade of its giant scythe. It was obvious that black mana would devour a space several times the size of the sickle. Yong-ho could not move back at this point. It was also reckless for him to block the monster by wielding Aemon, but Yong-ho did not stop. He took another step, remembering Skathak's words, "Catalina Master." Two voices rang almost simultaneously. And at that moment, when the screaming was going on, Catalina quickly approached him from behind his back, hugged him, and became his wings. The scythe of death swept the air. Yong-ho and Catalina overcame the evil energy of death. Under the wings made of black mana, Yong-ho saw Baphomet's red eyes. Then he swung Aemon to cut through the space above Baphomet's head. Waves of the green flames engulfed Baphomet's head. The death wrapping around Baphomet's body exploded when it collided with the green flames. Cutting through the scattering energy of death, Eligos and Ophelia rushed toward it. The two scattered to both sides with Baphomet in between. They then attacked it with full force. There was no roar, no explosion, no scream. The air was scattered by their strong attack, but that was it. Baphomet turned to blink. Its enormous body reappeared 10 meters high above its original place. Elagos was embarrassed. Ophelia immediately raised her head and looked at Baphomet. And death crushed Elagos and Ophelia one step ahead. It was a completely different kind of force they had never felt before. It wasn't the overwhelming presence of the strong. It wasn't even a physical force of destroying and breaking. It was death, the end of everything. The feeling of helplessness that they could not resist. The feeling of despair that there was nothing to rely on. Death penetrated Elagos and Ophelia. It didn't damage their bodies in any way. However, Elagos knelt down. Ophelia resisted by generating the mana of greed, but she could not stand it long. For a few seconds, when Ophelia desperately resisted, Baphomet landed on the ground again. Then it swung its left arm to strike down Ophelia. Suffering from the helplessness of death, she punched head-on by a giant blow. She bounced off more than a dozen meters like a broken marionette. Then Baphomet kicked out Elagos by swinging his right arm, holding the scythe of death. Rotating its body greatly, it once again released the wave of death. The chains on Baphomet's neck and arms broke through the air with a terrible noise. Skull broke through death. He broke the black and huge waves of death with a battle hammer. He narrowed the distance with Baphomet at once and swung the lightning hammer again. Lightning flashed from Baphomet's legs. It wasn't a fatal injury. However, Baphomet's legs were bent for a moment. Skull pulled the hammer again, and above Skull's head and higher above Baphomet's head, Yong-ho pulled Aemon. Then, holding Aemon upside down, he created the Pillar of Flames. The green flame struck Baphomet hard, then engulfed its whole body. Catalina rejoiced, but it was too early for her to rejoice. The moment when the green flames covered its whole body, Baphomet kicked out Skull. Using that momentum, it rotated its body, and once again, it tore the air with chains on its limbs. Holding the scythe of death tightly, it split the air. But the scythe didn't reach Yong-ho. Nonetheless, death did not stop and spread. The power that could only be expressed as pitch black penetrated Yong-ho and Catalina. Catalina's head was broken. She was helpless, with no screaming or moaning. Like Elagos experienced, Yong-ho stuck it out, clenching his teeth. Even while he was falling, he swung his left arm wildly. Just like he did when he defeated Chwiryong, he added Catalina's black mana to the mana of greed, and he swept both Baphomet and the ground with a giant's hand. At the same time, Baphomet jumped to avoid the giant's arm. Yong-ho landed on the ground with the help of a giant's arm instead of falling to the floor. He raised his head to attack the monster with Catalina, who finally pulled herself together, but they were crushed by Baphomet. It wasn't like black mana or death. Literally, a huge palm pressed both Yong-ho and Catalina simultaneously. They could not resist the pure physical force created by the monster's weight and speed. Both of them got tangled together and were crushed on the floor. They screamed in pain when their bones were broken. Baphomet laughed madly. Yong-ho felt he was losing consciousness. He was punched only once, but the blow was so painful, Yong-ho once again clenched his teeth under Baphomet's palm. If he could not use his limbs freely, he intended to release his mana all at once and bounce off the palm of this monster. At the same time, Yong-ho felt that Elagos and Ophelia began to move. And even Skull, who was thrown on the floor by Baphomet's blow, was also standing up again. Each of them released mana of greed. Yong-ho further amplified the mana of greed by syncing with the dungeon spirits. But at that moment, Yong-ho made eye contact with Baphomet. It lowered its head to see him, even when the spirits of the House of Mammon were rushing toward it. Its head resembled a goat. It was different from a human head. Yong-ho could read its expression. It smiled brightly. That was the only smile it could make. Madness and rejoice, brightness and joy. It was obviously more weakened than before. But there was something that didn't change. It was still the incarnation of death. It was a monster formed at the sacrifices of 10,000 people, as well as the death itself imagined by beings in the alien world. It survived by eating over tens of thousands, rather millions of deaths. Death smiled. It exuded a force that could not even be compared with anything until now. With no sound or movement, it covered a huge black space. It swallowed up the lights of the dungeon lighting devices that Yong-ho's party had spread for this battle. Elagos and Ophelia fell to the floor in the same position they were charging. They couldn't move even a finger because of their enormous helplessness. Skull was no exception. Although he already belonged to death, it did not mean he was free from death. His vivid sensation of death elicited a sense of life from him. Skull remembered his life for the first time since becoming an undead. That was why he experienced the second death. Old fear and dread, as well as all the things he had to give up by dying, once again destroyed Skull's spirit. Skull collapsed. He suffered from deep despair and sorrow, so much so that it wasn't strange even if tears poured out of his hollow eyes. Memories of living tormented him. Young-ho breathed a short, rough breath. He became more and more unconscious. Although he experienced hundreds of times of mental death in the space Aemon created, all of it was fake. It wasn't real death. He couldn't feel the passage of time, which was natural, for it was what death was. There was nothing there. Despair broke his will. Empty feelings swallowed up his anger. Accept it, death. Absolute serenity. Baphomet raised its hand. In fact, no matter how fast it did, Yong-ho felt its action was very slow. Yong-ho did not close his eyes. Instead of Baphomet's hand or death sickle, he saw something else. It was a so-called kaleidoscopic view of his life events. Chapter 19, Outburst of Anguish 2. He graduated from an elementary school life that he would never spend like that if he were born, grown up, and went back to it again. He entered an all-male middle school because it was close to his home. He entered an all-male high school because the nearby co-ed high school was closed. Then he entered an engineering college because he liked engineering. Now, one more thing would make his life perfect: joining the army. He had joy and sadness. Although he had frustrations and trials, he had achievements and happiness. It was a good life. He had no regrets. Although he never dated a girl, it wasn't a big deal. He didn't have a blind date, which he had expected a lot before going to college, but it didn't matter. Rather than being confessed by a lover, he never confessed love to any girl. But he didn't care. At least he kissed once. His partner was Ophelia. He kissed her for the purpose of overwhelming her mentally. He also touched Catalina's ears and tail. Kaiwan also said that she would grant his wish, whatever it was. His thinking was perhaps unfounded, but he felt that Kaiwan fell in love with him. To be honest, wasn't she serious? Didn't she say she would grant his wish? She could not say it to anybody, right? What about Catalina? She didn't show her heart to me, but was she feeling the same way as Kaiwan? So what? Damn it. Yong-ho opened his eyes suddenly. When he looked back nostalgically, he found his eyes wet before he knew it, so he got rid of this kaleidoscopic stuff. He had to survive now. There were still many things he hadn't done yet. My little master, Ayamon's voice was heard. It was clear that perhaps from the moment death filled the empty space on the second floor, Amon called him anxiously. The passage of time was still slow. Baphomet only now grabbed the scythe of death. So, Yong-ho had to move first and stand up after getting rid of this monster desire. Long for it, be greedy. My little master, Ayamon shouted. Yong-ho understood it. So, he brought out the power of greed. It was an original desire. He might be blamed for bringing out the will to live like that, but he didn't care. He imagined, he hoped, and wished for it. He burst out anguish, hope, and desire. I really want to do it, he shouted. He shouted, yes, he was serious. There were so many things he wanted to do. There were so many things he hadn't done yet. So he couldn't die. He couldn't be overwhelmed with death. Time accelerated. Baphomet felt embarrassed. At the same time, he saw the scythe of death at its peak. Yong-ho grabbed Amon. He felt Catalina was still groaning in death. Clenching his teeth, he activated the magnetic field. The power of greed, the power of desire. He didn't recklessly use up the unleashed anguish. His godly energy was a mass of brigada. Although the magic field on his left hand was incomplete, it had godly energy. Finally, Yong-ho brought life out of the 12 spirits, which was the power of immortal witch Skathak that perfectly matched his will to live. Blue watery light exploded from his left hand. The power of life drove away Baphomet's death. Baphomet stumbled. For the first time since it confronted Yong-ho, it screamed in pain. It suffered by crying out the name of Skathak, who had the power of life. Yong-ho breathed roughly. He couldn't stand up, but he poured the power of life onto Baphomet. By offsetting death with life, he transformed Baphomet from the incarnation of death into just a giant monster. He needed to take the next step immediately, but his next move was already ready. Stand up, my dungeon spirits. His dungeon spirits were faithful to his order. Eligos and Ophelia ran toward it. When they stood up again, they felt a strong force of life. They shared Yong-ho's desire and will to live from the mana of greed transmitted through Brigada. This time, they completely destroyed Baphomet's legs. Baphomet collapsed, kneeling down. It wailed even louder. It tried to drive away Yong-ho's force of life that neutralized his death. Catalina took his hand. She didn't want to die either. There were so many things she wanted to do while still alive. Holding her hand, he stared sharply at Baphomet. Then he ordered the last dungeon spirit right next to him. Skull. Skull rose from death. Grabbing the battle hammer, he rushed toward Baphomet. All the power of the dungeon spirits was concentrated on Yong-ho through Brigada, which he, in turn, retransmitted to Skull. The green flames rose from the tip of the battle hammer. Greed with black mana sword and the mana of Eligos and Ophelia connected them all. Baphomet was struggling desperately. Instead of the scythe of death being evaporated by the power of life, he swung his huge right arm. Skull rode over it and charged at it. He added lightning to the power of greed, with the battle hammer that was broken without withstanding Baphomet's concentrated power, but still functioning. Skull jumped up and stared straight at Baphomet's red eyes. It was no longer the incarnation of death. What was standing before him right now was just a huge black monster. Skull struck it with the battle hammer in a row. The concentrated power of greed exploded right above Baphomet's head. Skull landed on the ground as if to fall. Eligos and Ophelia raised their heads, breathing roughly. And finally, Yong-ho, who stood up finally, stretched out the magic field of his left hand. Baphomet, whose head was destroyed, could not see Yong-ho. However, Yong-ho saw its red eyes. As the king of greed, he granted the promised rest in peace to the incarnation of death that was still harboring death, despite his drastic weakness. Baphomet smiled. Yong-ho felt that way. And at that moment, Baphomet's enormous body turned into black ashes and scattered in the air. Yong-ho slowly clenched his fist and looked at the newly added jewel on the back of his left hand with the magic field, black with a purple hue. Capricorn, the power of Baphomet, the demon of slaughter. Yong-ho reaped the power of life and possessed the power of death. It was like breaking a tight string suddenly. The moment when new power was added to the magic field, Yong-ho felt deeply tired. He acutely felt the pain all over his body again. It hurt, and very much at that. He felt like his bones were broken all over his body. Although he was punched by Baphomet once, his whole body ached. Baphomet's attack wasn't just punching. The moment Yong-ho was pressed by its palm, the black mana arising from Baphomet's left hand hacked his body. His body wasn't only bruised, but also his skin ruptured. Besides, his body bled from various cuts. He wanted to squat down right now. However, he stuck it out, taking a deep breath. He was holding Catalina's hand in his right hand, instead of Amon. Catalina was injured as well. Since she was behind Yong-ho, she wasn't hacked by black mana, but Baphomet striking down damaged her more than Yong-ho. Yong-ho looked at Catalina, who, in turn, looked at him. They both poured so much mana into Brigada that their hands were trembling, but they smiled at each other, which looked silly. Yong-ho hugged her. Rather, it was Catalina who hugged him. The two leaned on each other like that. He realized that he was alive by burying his face in her neck. When death engulfed everything, Yong-ho had a desire. That desire wasn't just lust. Had it been only lust, he would never have overcome Baphomet's death. There were a lot of things he really wanted to do. He seemed to know why Aemon described his lust as anguish. It was greed. He didn't give up on anything. Rather, he couldn't give it up. Everything belonged to Yong-ho. Catalina was warm and soft when he hugged her, so he naturally closed his eyes. He wanted to stay like that for the rest of his life. Not only her breathing, but also her subtle body scent was all sweet. Strangely enough, however, he recalled Kaiwan's face at that moment. To be precise, it was her smile right before she confronted him in the arena. Come to think of it now, It was almost like a foul smile. How could she show such a smile to him right before the fighting? He thought she outwitted him back then. It was not Kaiwan alone that came to his mind. Gusyon, Skathak, and Aemon's faces came to his mind one by one. He also remembered his own dungeon spirits and the exclusive 12 spirits of the House of Mammon. He smiled awkwardly and opened his eyes. As if she was tired, Catalina did open her eyes. She was wiggling her tail weakly, but that was all. She seemed to totally rely on him. It looked like she would collapse at the mere touch. Yong-ho hugged her waist a little harder. He kissed her head unwittingly and looked around. They were all exhausted. Chapter 130. Outburst of anguish. 3 Eligos and Ophelia were lying on the floor. Yong-ho thought they were having a touching hug, but they were too tired to do it. However, they were still strong red demons. Eligos, who could be called the strongest of the Mammon spirits, raised his upper body slowly. But Ophelia couldn't get up easily, as if the blow by Baphomet was quite strong. However, she did not lose consciousness and whispered to Eligos. Yong-ho eventually gave up standing. He sat down, touching the floor with one hand and holding Catalina with the other. As soon as he sat down, he wanted to lie down again, but he barely held down the urge to do so. When he turned his head a little more, he saw Skull. Skull was also a total wreck. The battle hammer that Bergrim improved for him was completely destroyed. What he had now was a bag only. His armor and helmet were also broken. He wasn't as bare as when he first came to the House of Mammon, but it was the first time since his fight with Porus that he was injured so much like this. Skull, kneeling on the floor and supporting his upper body with one cracked arm, trembled. His chin and head, in particular, trembled badly. Skull. It was Skull that dealt a final fatal blow to Baphomet. Did he overwork himself because Yong-ho mobilized too much power into him? When Yong-ho called him in a worried voice, Skull slowly turned his head. Ghost flames that were supposed to be present in his hollow eyes were too small. And that wasn't all. Yong-ho felt somewhat concerned about Skull. It was something like a feeling of strangeness, and Yong-ho alone didn't feel it. He could sense Skull's feelings transmitted through Brigadier Yong-ho, found it hard to express what it was. It was the kind of feeling that he could express by comparing it to a torrent raging under the quiet water. Skull. Yong-ho called him again. Skull reacted at his affectionate calling. Although it was a skull without any expression, Yong-ho knew that Skull was trying to smile. Though, with an effort, Skull cull. Speaking slowly and quietly, Skull fell to the floor instead of struggling to stick it out. As if he was encouraged by Yong-ho's calling, Skull cleared his anxiety a lot. Skull now seemed to be resting comfortably, like Ophelia and Catalina. Watching them, Yong-ho gulped. His sense of strangeness about Skull disappeared, and he could do nothing because there was nothing unusual about Skull at this point. Yong-ho just hoped it wasn't a big deal. Then, once again, he held Catalina anew and hugged her. After overcoming the temptation to fall asleep next to her, he looked at the mana in the empty space. The energy of death hadn't yet completely disappeared from there. It was the same black mana but different from Catalina's. Catalina's black mana resembled the gentle night that embraced people. On the other hand, Baphomet's black mana was like cold and terrifying despair. Black mana swirled in the place where Baphomet stood. When it swirled once, the darkness scattered in all directions, which was spectacular. Indeed, Yong-ho touched the magic field on his left hand with his right hand over her waist. Despite him not seeing it, the newly created Baphomet jewel clearly came to his mind. The power of death, contrary to Skathak's life. Yong-ho finally let out a sigh. Prepared for fainting, he extended his right arm. Instead of hugging Catalina, he let her rest her hair on his thigh and grabbed the air. Following the flames of the red lotus, the green lotus arose. He collected not only his remaining mana, but also that of Eligos, Ophelia, Skull, and even Catalina, who almost passed out, and poured it into Aemon. His efforts paid off. Although he was not in the arena, he could talk with Aemon, my little master. Watching Aemon's true body, the burning spear, reminiscent of a weapon from the age of mythology, Yong-ho asked, "Is Baphomet completely dead? He couldn't afford to beat around the bush." Aemon answered his straightforward question. Baphomet is the incarnation of death, the realization of the concept of death that humans in the alien world conceived. Prol, its body, which had been worn away for 1,000 years since the disappearance of its owner, has now completely disappeared. Since the container holding the concept has disappeared, the concept will also disappear. However, we can't say it's completely extinct. The essence of Baphomet remained in its unfinished godly energy. Not only Baphomet's power, death, but also some consciousness remains in it. But, my little master, you don't have to worry. It will never be able to hurt you, nor it will. Baphomet couldn't hurt him. It also didn't have the intention to do so. Young-ho let out a long sigh. Armin smiled gently. My little master, good job. The power of greed comes from desire. However, simple lust can't bring out the true power of greed, for it would be closer to the power of the king of lust rather than the power of the king of greed. Chwiryong, the power of lust was strong for you, but because it was mixed with the purer, original desire, you could overcome Baphomet's death, his hope and desire. Project your true wishes onto your desire. Indeed, Armin correctly pointed out what seemed to be embarrassing to Young-ho. Instead of replying, Young-ho looked at Catalina's face blankly. He had the urge to touch her cheek, but he couldn't because he was grabbing Aemon at the moment. But he was reaching the breaking point slowly. This time, he really wanted to touch her cheek quite seriously. So Young-ho asked the last question. Third floor, who, among the 12 spirits, controls the third floor? Aemon didn't answer right away. There was some pause. As a human, Aemon would have sighed or smiled bitterly during that short span. Elune, whose star sign is Libra, cutting the night. She is the owner of the third floor of the Labyrinth of Greed. After answering, Aemon withdrew the flames, then went back to a bracelet, its original shape. Cutting the night, Elune, the escort knight for Mammon, the king of greed, and his sweetheart Young-ho caressed Catalina's cheek. He closed his eyes because of her extremely soft face, but he shouted with all his might. He called Salami, Bucephalus, and the Skull Squad, who were waiting in the corridor. The passage to the third floor was opened, but now was not the right time to move. First, he had to go back to Skathak on the first floor to restore stamina and mana. He felt Salami running behind his back. Only then did Young-ho take a load off his mind. Touching Catalina's cheeks, he fell into a deep sleep. The end of the long battle was around the corner finally. Ploros, the head of the Western Owners Alliance, laughed vainly. It was not because Chicharo of the House of Bern, his strong ally, literally disappeared, bleeding before his eyes. The Western Owners Alliance was defeated by Embryo, and that defeat was already certain from the beginning. 5 horns, which was the evidence of the strength towering over Embryo's head. They weren't new horns, as a result of Embryo destroying the househeads in northern and western regions. Although he had only 4 horns from the beginning, Embryo, who cultivated his mana over the years, knew it. Embryo had 5 horns from the beginning. Most of the househeads in the northern and western regions lagged far behind him in power, and perhaps even the power they absorbed by essences of horns was little. It was natural that the househeads in the northern region lost to Embryo helplessly. It was also understandable that each of them showed their might, just like the one-man army. It was highly likely that there were quite a few with 5 horns under the command of 6 kings, but it was not the case in the barren place of the south. To be precise, Embryo could be said to be the only and the most powerful in the southern area. Embryo absorbed the essence of Chicharo. Since it had only 4 horns from the beginning, his absorption helped him a bit. Embryo took another step. Ploros smiled bitterly at that. It wasn't just because of Embryo's horns that Ploros understood the defeat as something certain from the beginning. Ploros realized who was standing behind Embryo. That was why he gave up and laughed scornfully. You can't be a king, Embryo. You will eventually fall miserably after chasing only the king's shadow. It was not known which king was supporting Embryo. However, whoever he was, he would not ignore Embryo's ambitions. Embryo did not answer. He just silently approached Ploros. That was why Ploros laughed again. Instead of begging for life miserably, he wounded Embryo's mind with a final scorn. You know, Embryo, that you can never be a king. Those were his last words. Ploros couldn't talk anymore. With his heart destroyed while he was still alive, he died. Embryo took his essence. It could get quite a lot of power, just like the strongest head of a house in the western region. You cannot be a king. It was a curse. Embryo decided to think so. By ordering a group of wolves to eat Plauros' body, it dispelled his displeasure. The smoke from the battlefield covered the sky. Death, screams, and groaning resonated everywhere. Leaving all this behind, Embryo stepped forward. He was heading for the south, where a great king was born,